Prime Minister Narendra Modi will be visiting Russia on Monday. This will be his first official visit to Russia since the Ukraine conflict. It has been 5 years since Prime Minister Narendra Modi visited Moscow. This comes days after the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar met his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit that was taking place in Astana in Kazakhstan. Now, both the leaders spoke about strengthening India-Russia bilateral ties. External Affairs Ministry conducted a press meeting today where they said that the Prime Minister will be meeting the Indian community living in Russia in his official visit as well. There is going to be a closed-door one-on-one meeting that will be held by the Indian and the Russian leader. Let's start off our conversation. Patikrit Pen on the telecast with me. Patikrit, the meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the Russian counterpart takes center stage, and it becomes of much significance in wake of the SCO summit that has just gotten completed.
No, it's not just because of the SCO summit. I think this meeting is particularly important for various things that are happening globally. There are areas of convergence between India and Russia on issues of reforms in multilateral institutions, the way dollar is weaponized, the way sanctions happen, unilateral sanctions. Those things are issues of concern for both countries. And I think there's a possibility of many of the Russian companies now eventually investing downstream into the Indian market. Some of the issues related to the rupee-ruble exchange mechanism have been sorted out. I think the relationship will be deepened more in areas beyond energy and defense. You might see the international north-south transport corridor, in which Russia is probably the starting point and it ends in India. I think a lot will be focused on that, because that reduces the cost and time dynamics by 30 to 40% when it comes to critical commodities being transported or supplied from Russia to India and vice versa. So I think there are many areas where Russia and India needs to come together. Of course, it would raise a lot of eyebrows when it comes to the NATO and other Western countries. But I think India has for long back dehyphenated its foreign policy. India's good friendship with Russia does not in any way, as far as India is concerned, impacts its relation with the Western Hemisphere countries concerned. So I think it might give rise to a new beginning, because today many of the Russian government also wants Indian companies to invest in the Russian market, from which many of the Western companies have exited. There are certain concerns of the Indian companies because of a large amount of FII investments they have in those companies which are based in the West. So they fear that there can be some kind of a reprisal, some kind of sanctions or other problems that might be raised. So we have to see how it works out. Also, the issue of BRICS will be, discussed, and the potential possibility of institutionalizing the rupee-ruble exchange mechanism. So I think it's interesting because, Russia is a country which needs to be respected. It has its own hemisphere where its sphere of influence must be respected. And I think if this war has to end, then I think Russia has to be given its due weightage, which unfortunately the West is not giving. Merely pumping in money into Ukraine is not going to end this war. It's only going to take this war into the threshold of Western Europe, which already almost is literally happening.
Okay.
So let's see how it works out. But I think it's a very...
Okay, all right. Also on the telecast with me, let me just introduce the gentleman over here. I have with me Surinder Singh Lali. And why I spoke about the SCO, because, there has been a statement, much appalling, that has been made by Xi Jinping at the SCO summit that was taking place in Kazakhstan, and where he's spoken about how the SCO member nations must stay away from China's quote-unquote internal affairs. There was also a meeting that S. Jaishankar had held with his Chinese counterpart. And in the meantime, there have been, the rapprochement that we see between the Chinese premier and the Russian president, where they have called each other the bestest of friends and hold such close camaraderie with each other, is then a point of concern for India as well, because time and again during the RIC summits that had taken place in the past, the trilaterals, there had been some sort of an expectation from Russia to iron out things between India and China, particularly with regards to the military standoff that continues up until today along the line of control, line of actual control?
Thank you, Megha. And I think India is being very careful in terms of, dealing with the SCO. Simply because, there are, I would say this is, Cold War 2.0, which has kind of started. We just had the G20, which was very successful, and then the G7 Prime Minister Modi went, and I really hope that we do make it to the 8th G8. We do become G8 because we need our own space and we deserve it, especially, how we've been a link between the global, South and the North. But if you look at it, and I was observing that, we chose to make the last SCO virtual. And this one also was kind of skipped by the Honorable Prime Minister, and, Dr. Shankar went. And the next one is in Pakistan. So I feel now India needs to play, and we are playing very optically also right, because while we need the West, we need their economy, we need their markets, we cannot really do away with Russia also. And, doing away with Russia, of course, amongst many other reasons, buying a defense equipment, would also push Russia more closer to China, and that's something we can't afford. So I feel that for us, it's a very thin line that we're walking, because Iran and Pakistan also joined the SCO, and I wouldn't be surprised in the next one, if there could be Turkey and Saudi Arabia too.
Yeah.
So the way things are panning out, we need to be very careful, because India's maintained a line from day one, especially with the Modi government and their dispensation, is that we don't wish to be an ally. We wish to be a strategic partner. We don't want to be a, Japan or a South Korea, which would not have their, global autonomy in terms of military might. I mean, they're definitely so much beholden to the G7 or the G20. So I feel this SCO and dealing with this SCO has really become a very sensitive subject. Yes. Because we don't want to be on either sides. And I think one of the prime reasons why, Narendra Modi made the government made the last one that we were president of virtual, because I don't think it would have made the right optics, us having, all the Western economies and their leaders being photographed. And then we have, Xi Jinping and Putin on the other hand. So I think
I also feel, Surinder Singh Lali, that, the China Russia camaraderie, the Xi Jinping and Putin friendship overshadowed everything that was happening at the SCO, and that's what has been the talk of the town, particularly in the Western media. And like you spoke about how there has been an impetus that has been made by China, by Russia and all the other SCO nations, is about increasing the sphere of the bloc, which is, like you said, increasing the number of member nations that are going to eventually become part of the SCO. So how does it play out for India is what is the question. Now, particularly when we talk about India being the leader and the guiding light for global South, how do we attain that? And can Russia become part of this stratagem that India has?
Yes, I think in some way, I think Russia does support that whatever role India is playing in terms of being the voice of the global South. Especially we have seen the way India has helped the global South economies during the COVID time by giving them vaccines, by giving them other necessary, commodities. And I think the reason why India is preferred by many of the global South economies is because we don't wake up in the morning and tell them that either you are with us or against us. So we have never in some way, hyphenated our relationship by saying that you cannot talk to anyone else. So we have had a much more beneficial, benign approach towards the entire concerns of the global South. And when we say that reforms are required in multilateral institutions, that unilateral sanctions should be done away with, the reason is because multilateral institutions often have been seen that they don't take into account the concerns of smaller economies. When Sri Lanka was in crisis, none of the multilateral institutions came to help them. When sanctions were imposed on Russia and commodity prices went up, the sky across the world, it is as marginalized and smaller economies which suffer the most. Sri Lanka being a great example of that also. So I think Russia doesn't mind India playing that role. And at the same time, I also want to add one thing, that we generally do not go to Russia. While we do deepen our relationships, we do understand the reason why Russia has to be in close proximity with China. That's why that issue is never raised.
Yeah.
The reason is simple. It is the West which has pushed Russia to that extent that it has no option but to depend on Russia, on China, because of trade factors and not anything else. We must also not forget that there are strategic differences these two countries also have. And Russia, everything said and done, has never discounted us for the cost of China. So we know our limitations, and that's why we don't get into that. That's the reason I said this relationship and this meeting will not be much about China. We understand that Russian concerns, and Russia understands India's concern as well. Okay. So wherever possible, they do play a role, but everybody knows their limitations.
So there is a tacit understanding over there. And also, a number of pointers that had been raised by the Foreign Secretary Vinay Kwatra then when he held that press conference today, press briefing today, and he's spoken about, of course, he's spoken about the 2020 special partnership that initiated between India and Russia and now goes on up until now, which is 1920 and goes on up until 2024. He's spoken about, the bilateral trade, particularly, there is a $65 billion US dollar energy cooperation between the two nations. He's also spoken about the balance of trade. There are $4 billion US dollars worth of exports for India to from India to Russia, and there's $60 billion of imports from Russia to India. So, and then speaking about energy and banking and railways, steel, defense, nuclear energy. He's spoken also about Kudankulam nuclear plant that is going to be also provided support by the Russian nuclear energy enterprises. So, a word from you then, Surinder Lali. How can we foster relationships that are going to further help both the countries in developing global powers?
I'll have to take a cue from what Mr. Paine said, and which is so true, that we don't have to look at with Russia always through the prism of China. I mean, one of the reasons why Pakistan failed as a nation was because they couldn't think beyond their pathological hatred for India and maybe the state of Israel. So, Megha, yes, I fully agree. And I think this world is now sort of the Cold War 2.0, which I often call it, is now becoming, two lobbies between the haves and the have-nots. While the Western economies are all powerful, might, and G7 controls, 30, 40, 50% of the global GDP. And then there is another lobby of China, Russia, now Iran, SCO. So I think there are two lobbies being created, and the West is still living in their ivory towers, and they still are in a habit of being into the ally business. So I think we are doing a great job to answer your question, is that for us, we don't need to be obsessed or impressed or, sit into anybody's lap. We just need to look at it through the prism of our geopolitical interests, our energy requirements, our partnerships with other armies, and also our defense equipment. I mean, if you see, we are gradually moving out. I mean, 60 to 70% of our defense equipment was to Russia, but now the way we're moving out to the state of Israel, to France and to America. So I think we're on the path. I mean, these kind of things take a lot longer than one might want to. They're not like a Domino's pizza that comes in 30 minutes. But we just allow me to complete. But we have it, to answer your question now directly, we've made it amply clear, not to one country, but to the world, that for us, our energy needs, our own 1.4 billion people, our economy, and our strategic requirements are far more than to be a part of the have or the have-nots.
Okay.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.